Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Make Visual Novels with Dagger. Sorry it's been a while since the last episode and since I uploaded any fan-related stuff, but I got a new job recently, and the past couple weeks has been a lot of training and just going through the motions to make sure I got everything all set. But I'm doing okay, and think I found a good way so I can keep pumping out lots of good stuff for you guys. So last time, we were talking about adding voices to our visual novels, and I said we were going to learn about when and when not to add voices to our visual novel, and simply put, that's entirely up to you of what you want to do. So you can have a visual novel that's more like an animated comic book, where the sound, the art, music, sound effects, and all that to tell your story and to capture the emotion, to capture the mood for you. But then you could have something that's completely voiced to make it feel more cinematic. But that's entirely up to you as the creator of your own visual novel of how you want to go from there. And what type of story you want to tell and what assets that you want to use to tell your story. Now there's 3 different types of visual novels. Now like I said a moment ago, there's a type of visual novel that's just the artwork, sound effects, and music. But then there's another type which adds little voice snippets. Like different types of voice sounds to a character. Not fully voiced lines, but just different types of response sounds. Just little things for a character. So when a line of text goes, you can hear some type of character voice. But then there's the third, which is the more complicated, which is a fully voiced character to make the experience seem more like a TV show or a movie. Now, the first type of visual novel is incredibly easy to do. At least to me, it's easy to do. That's right, going back to Higurashi again. Now, in the original Higurashi When They Cry, as well as different remakes that have been released, it plays more like an animated comic book, where you'll have you'll have walls of text, you'll have different types of backgrounds, character art, character reactions, but the story is told through the text, obviously, but it's also told through the sound effects and the music. As a big horror fan that loves scary things and the things that go bump in the night, this is a very effective way of telling your story, because as Higurashi starts, it gives you a false sense of security. Where, it's a happy little village, everything's fine, you have a bunch of these brand new friends, everything's fine, everything's good, until some random guy comes up to you and is like, hey, how about those murders, huh? That was really weird, huh? And then you're just sitting there like, huh? And then your sanity just spirals out of control until you ultimately start beating people to death with a metal baseball bat. Now that particular story arc is told extremely well because, the language starts off great, the language starts off really happy, the music is happy, the sound effects are, they just make you happy, they make you cheery. But then the second when that one random guy comes in and starts telling you, some really weird stuff, then you start getting different types of sound effects, more actiony, more jarring sound effects, and especially really off-putting music. And it only gets more and more intense as the story goes on. And it's written in a very powerful first-person perspective manner where you actually feel your sanity starting to go, and you feel everything. Now that's just one, and that doesn't include voices. The second type of visual novel has not fully voiced lines, but it does have little voice snippets for certain characters. A good example of this is the recent Fire Emblem games, where you see Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates. You'll have the character portraits pop up over the background, you'll have the text box, and then every once in a while you'll have Crom, Robin, or Lucino. They'll just say like, what? Or, I see. Or something to that effect, you know what I mean? Like for me personally, if you're gonna add voices to characters, I would just go all the way in and have everybody voiced. But it's a stylistic direction. I don't knock it for that, but I would just prefer, if you're gonna do that, you should, think about fully voicing lines if you can. but it's a way to do it. It gives you a chance to read, but then you can also hear a character's voice in those snippets, and you can take the voice that you heard and try to imagine, that character's voice in your head as you're reading it. Now that sounds really confusing, doesn't it? Okay, well, let me give you an example. Have you ever read a comic book, a manga or something, where like you think of this one big voice actor you're a really big fan of, and you heard his voice in the anime, you heard his voice in just anything, and you're just like, hey, that voice sounds like it could fit this one character. Let me imagine this actor using this voice for this character in this scene. We've all done that, haven't we? Where you have like, I don't know how to describe it, like head cannons, I guess you could say. I don't really like using that term, but it perfectly describes what I'm talking about, like head cannons for a certain character voice. Now, as a kid, when I would read manga, or even nowadays when I'm reading something, like just recently I've been reading the Ghost in the Shell manga, and as I'm reading it, I would imagine the voices from Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, where Motoko's voice in that would be her voice in the manga. But then sometimes I would hear her actress in the Ghost in the Shell English dub, the original movie's English dub, and I would hear that voice sometimes from Motoko. And then a scene with Bato would come in, or a scene with Aramaki, Togasa, and I would just think of the actors that have portrayed them. And I would read those scenes with those characters' voices in mind. So this second type of visual novel is kind of like that. You get a hint of what this character's voice will sound like. So as you're reading the dialogue, you're reading the text and all that, you can hear that voice say these lines in your head. It's an effective approach, but like I said, if you're gonna add voices, like voice lines, I'd say you should probably think about going all in with fully voiced dialogue. So that brings us to our third type, which is everything fully voiced. Now that sounds pretty self-explanatory. Let's go to an old favorite. Let's go to Blaze Blue. Yeah, that's right. We're bringing that back. Now, Blaze Blue's story is told through a visual novel style. Characters, background, sound effects, music, the whole 9 yards. But in the English dub and in the original Japanese, every line is recorded and every line is fully voiced. So it kind of moves from that animated comic book feel of the first type, the Higurashi type, to something that's a little bit more cinematic, more like a TV show or an OVA, a movie. And that's another extremely effective too, because you're not just sitting there, reading all the text. You seem like you're watching something. And these type of visual novels have a certain option where when the last word of a line is read, it will advance to the next line. So you don't have to keep pushing the advance button, the next button to go to the next scene, the next line. It'll just automatically play out. A lot of times when I'd be playing, Persona 4, Persona 5, I would set it to auto advance. So this, when the last word is said, it would just go to the next line, so I wouldn't have to click anything. I could just sit there and watch. Now, having everything fully voiced does make it seem like a movie, and that's really cool, but, there's a lot of technical stuff that go with that, too. And, I love technical stuff. Now, having everything fully voiced is extremely complicated, and it can be really technical. Not just from a programming perspective, where you have to make sure the voice lines will match up to the text that you've written, and that everything animates and syncs properly, but there's a bunch of other little things that matter. Like, do you want a character to make different types of guttural sounds? Do you want them to make a sound when they get punched in the stomach? Do you want them to make some type of sound when they're gasping, when they're afraid? Do you want them to make a sound when, they're exerting some type of effort? So there's just a lot of things as a director, voice director, you got to think about how you want your characters to sound. Now, most of the time when I make my stuff, I just have a fully voiced line, and sometimes I'll have some type of sound of exertion where a character's getting hit, or they're swinging something, or they're doing something where they make a kind of sound. Not necessarily that kind of sound, but you know what I mean. But then, you have other times where, uh, for example, you can have a character that's really scared and they're making like, like different types of stuttery breaths like that. Now, this goes into the technical aspect of, what you want in your visual novel, how you want things to sound. Like for me personally, I wouldn't have that because it just makes me think I'm watching an episode of Dragon Ball Z. And we know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you have a scene in Dragon Ball Z where the big bad guy has reached a power level that has never been seen before, and it's just absolutely amazing and absolutely unbelievable, while the characters will just stand there with their mouth agape, eyes shot wide open. And they'll make those breaths like that. Now, even as a kid, in grade school and high school when I was watching, Dragon Ball Z, I would just hate that. I would just hate that because it just sounds really dumb to me. It's like, yes, it's a directorial take, and it's up to the director to have that. And, I'm not making fun of them for having their actors do that, but I personally don't like that because all I need to see is the character's face and what their body is doing in a certain situation such as that. Like, if a character is scared, I think it's more effective that the character's not making any type of sound. I mean, a little breath maybe here and there, like a little gasp, like when they turn their head or they just completely whip around to see what's hiding behind him. I'm like, okay, that's fine with that, but I think it's way more effective for a terrified character not to make any type of sound, because that's the point of being terrified. Your body just shuts down for the most part. You can't help staring at this horrible monstrosity in front of you, or your mind is just thinking of all types of horrible things of what could be standing, what could be lurking behind you. So I think it's way more effective to just have a character that's not making any sound, period. Like, because you could just see everything that's going on in their eyes, their face, and the way that their body trembles. But that's just me personally. Or then you could have complete opposite, a character that's super happy, and you want to, show how happy-go-lucky they are. Now you can have them hum something, you can have them, make other different types of happy sounds. And that kind of, goes with what I said about terrified characters. Like, I get a character's happy from the humming and stuff, but you can't really oversell it because, you see the character's face, you see that they're happy, you see that they're skipping, you see that they're dancing around, you see that they're doing something. So you don't really need too many voice samples to drive that one home. Maybe just a little bit. But, again, it's up to what you want to do. It's up to your voice director. It's up to how you want to display the emotion of a scene. It's like, for me personally, I go by the rule of less is more. Now, this is also done in writing as well, where, you want to write that a character is, again, scared, say that they're happy. You don't just outright say, like, oh, they're terrified. They're like, ugh, all this stuff. It's like, that's just telling. You want to show that they're scared. So, like, if I'm writing a horror story, I'll just say, like, oh, like their body's quivering, their breaths are shaky. Their eyes are just rolling around in their sockets. But then you have to also understand that it's like, while showing is a lot better than telling, you don't want to overdo that too. Like, you could just have a few sentences of saying that, that they're ultimately scared. But you can't just, make every sentence, like, in the paragraph, like, oh, it's like this and this and this and this. It's like, yeah, we get it that they're scared. So you just have to pick and choose how you want a character to be scared or happy. So less is definitely more, and that definitely comes in, it comes in line with having voice samples and stuff. Because like I said, in Dragon Ball Z, it's like, yeah, we get the character scared. You don't need them going, oh, this power, like that. You don't need that. Because you get all of the information just by looking at the characters. So there you go. So when it comes to writing, when it comes to voices, even sound effects and music, less is more as well. Just like I say with Goldilocks, less is more can be applied to pretty much anything, and it'll be very effective. Okay, I think that'll be a good place to stop for this episode, since this is more of a snapshot look into the technical aspect of things. I know we didn't do any program for now, but just knowing about this technical stuff will help you, so when you sit down in programming, when you're thinking of how to make your scenes, when you're thinking of having your characters interact, you can look back on this and say, oh yeah, what if I do a lot of this? No, actually that might be overselling it. Maybe if I do just a little bit less, it'll be more effective. And most of the time, less is definitely more. So thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to go into a lot more technical and fun stuff next time, so I hope you're excited for that. So thanks again for watching. If you liked what you've seen and like what you've learned, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming lessons. And if you'd like to, please consider checking out the Patreon page for the channel. I hope you guys have a good day, and I will see you guys in the next lesson.